Welcome to the Feminine Principle podcast, heart-centered conversation for soul-centered women who are on a path of self-discovery. I'm your host, Nicola Lucy, shamanic practitioner, shadow and soul integration coach, and the creatrix behind the Feminine Principle, supporting women to redefine the relationship they have with themselves, others, and Mother Earth through the magic hidden in their unconscious. For more information, please visit thefeminineprinciple.com. Welcome, ladies, to the next episode in the Feminine Principle podcast series. And tonight I'm joined by the beautiful Imelda Almqvist, who is an international teacher of shamanism and sacred art and the author of 2 books, The Natural Born Shamans, A Spiritual Toolkit for Life, Sacred Art, A Hollow Bone for Spirit, Where Art Meets Shamanism. And Imelda has also presented her work and wisdom on the Shift Network and Sounds True, as well as on TV and the Shamanism Global Summit. She divides her time between the UK, US, and Sweden, and has just finished her 3rd book, Medicine of the Imagination, Dwelling in Possibility, which will be published later in the year.
That's right.
Welcome, Imelda. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. You and your beautiful ladies, your beautiful group.
And so, please do share with us. We've all been waiting in anticipation. Inner work as a form of activism.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, in our regular outside world, there is a lot of focus on, activism in the external sense, and it is absolutely necessary. Like, we need to put pressure on politicians. We need to make people aware of causes and things that are going wrong. And there's an awful lot of activism that needs to be done. So it's, very, very important, and activism can bring real change. We know that from history. But in my opinion, the external activism out there in the world needs to be matched by inner activism. And that is doing our inner work, doing our shadow work. And these sort of problems and things we encounter outside us, we also find them inside ourselves. And in a way, that is the immediate place to start work, because it is within us. So we can work with it any time. And I truly believe that unless everyone alive today commits to doing that work, we're not going to see the lasting changes in the world we need to see. So personally, I'm an advocate for teaching this in all schools. I would put it on the primary and secondary school curriculum and even university curriculum. Unfortunately, I have not had that influence. People have not taken my suggestion, but that's what I'm pushing for.
Yes, that's a really great concept, which is, so we've seen the movement of putting meditation in schools.
Mm-hmm.
But now also bringing this self-awareness and really working with that with the young people, because if they shift it on their level, then obviously we're going to make massive moves very, very quickly.
Exactly, and let's face it, they are going to be the doctors, the politicians, the nature keepers, the earth keepers of the future. And it's very nice to actually see some children right here on the screen, see Catherine's children. So it's wonderful that they are here, because that's what it is all about. It's not only about the world that we live in, it's also about the world we're going to leave for those who come after us. So, and imagine now if they would learn how to use their imagination correctly and how to do fearless shadow work, it would immediately change their relationships with all the children and people around them. And imagine that such a generation would become the leaders of our world. I mean, I often dream about what the world might be like if that happened.
Yes, and that shift. So the children, for example, even for us in this moment, we've seen how activism, so I think one of the most important movements that we've seen recently is the one for climate change, which is Extinction Rebellion. And, I see a lot of people going out, and it's great that people get together. But then how does that kind of reflect back to us? Because we've got a lot of people going out with all their banners, and they're involving their children. But then if they're not making them aware of what's going on the inside, how can we kind of make that shift?
Yeah, if we do not make the inner changes, indeed. And also, if we do not bring that change, we also know that unless we learn from history and unless we make decisions from a different place, history will keep on repeating itself. And I know that there's a lot of fear around that at the moment. We're seeing a lot of scenarios in the world where people think, have we not seen this before? Didn't we learn from this when it happened other times? Like in living memory. We just had the Holocaust memorial the other day. And I think that's, like listening and to some of these accounts and reading what people said, I think that's the overriding message, that people have to learn from this. Also like those people who died a tragic death, we cannot bring them back, but we can give them the gift of really learning something from their experience and making a different world now and making a different world for our children. I think that's the most important work of our time.
Yes. And so as adults, whether we've got children or not, how can we really bring that work and that knowledge and that self-awareness to the younger generations?
Well, I've already talked about curriculum and, like teaching it to people, but I think also, bringing it into our everyday relationships. I think that shadow work should be like brushing our teeth or washing our hair or whatever. It's like a form of spiritual and psychological hygiene. And with my students, I always say it's not just something you do from time to time. It needs to always be going on. It's like a script. It's like, like under your own breath all day long, you're going and say, oh, oops, I need to look at that. Or, oops, that person just reflected something at me that I need to look at. If we do not do that, we're going to be projecting everything out. And, it is a fact in psychology that whatever we cannot own in ourselves, we see it very well in other people, like we project it out. So meaning, if I cannot own the fact that I am angry, I'm going to be encountering a lot of angry people who are really like showing me that I need to look at the anger that is within me. So I feel that there needs to be this constant communication between the internal world and the external world. And even the uncomfortable things that happen in our world are always an invitation to go within. I mean, you can like see your own soul, your own psyche, like a landscape, or a garden, as it were, and you can go right there. You can pick litter, you can plant seeds, you can meet other people there and have dialogues with them. Like anything is possible in that sort of garden that is your imagination.
And yes, this is a really interesting point to pick up on, because something that you mentioned when we were organizing this and something that I put on the webpage, which was, looking at kind of like the mass murderers, looking at those aspects of society that we really don't want to look at. Mm-hmm. And even those people, they have so much to teach us about what is hidden in the self.
Yes, that's what in my upcoming book I've called a homeopathic dose of psychopathic medicine. Like some people may never read a book just because that phrase is in it. But I absolutely believe that there is such a thing as constellation work, family constellations work, pioneered by Bert Hellinger. And there it's very much believed that like all of us human people form a constellation, and we all stand in a unique position. And standing in that unique position, comes a certain awareness and perspective. But no one has the full perspective. We need all of the perspective of all the different people. So there is a kind of constellation that seems to repeat itself in it's like your family of origin. It is with maybe your family of friends that you create for yourself. It is in training groups you might attend, or any sort of groups or communities, even activism groups that come together, where a group comes together. There is a constellating of these kind of archetypal patterns, if you like, these blueprints deeply wired into the human psyche. And then you see that, people will start playing their roles. And then also because we human beings, we get afraid, and rightly so. I mean, I'm not promoting serial killers or psychopaths, not at all. Just saying the fact is that they exist. And at the moment, we've not found a way of making them not exist. In a percentage of the population, people are born that way. So the question then becomes, can even they teach us something? Or people who have those tendencies, can we work with them and meet them in such a way that their unique talents and skills can still be put to some kind of use? Research has been done that psychopaths can be put to very good use in, say, like the military. And I don't mean as killing machines, but I mean as people who do like strategy, people who need to keep a cool head, under very, very stressful circumstances. A normal human being would buckle under the weight of it. But actually a person who is a psychopath can keep that completely cool head and can keep their focus on what the actual priorities are. So there are actually certain jobs out there where, a good dose of psychopathy is actually of use. And that sounds very counterintuitive because there's so many things we'd like to eradicate in the human world. And of course, if I could, if I had the magic wand, yes, I too would like to do away with psychopaths and, any form of killing or murder and aggression. But in reality, that does not seem to be the case. I think we need to find a more creative way of working with what we have and the human potential that's locked into that, if that makes sense.
Yes. And also what's very interesting is that, I come across this a lot in my own work, but looking at those archetypes, for example, the murderer, we automatically judge the murderer for the act that it's committed. Mm-hmm. However, when we look back, we've not always reincarnated as good people. There is some element of bad, if we're going to use the labels good and bad, because neither exist. But in the family line, even going back through the generations, doing the ancestral healing, is that there has been murderers, and there have, through colonization, through war, etc., etc. By looking at this, we can then really start to see and develop a deeper understanding of trauma and how it's created.
Yes, that, but also, I'm glad you're speaking of the ancestors now, that, we live in a world where, and I'm just researching this for another book I am writing at the moment, where a decision was made by the church fathers, around the year 1100, that any kind of ancestor worship was to be stomped on and rooted out because the church wasn't comfortable with that. So in any place where, Christianity is a major religion, that's going to be a feature. So we pushed our ancestors away, our relationship with the ancestors were consciously and deliberately broken and stomped on and replaced by very, old ways of thinking. When what the devil was introduced, there wasn't the devil before. So a lot of really, dubious, I think, cultural material came in. But the thing is, if we start doing ancestral work again, our ancestral lineages stretch such a long way back that everything we find in the human constellation today, just looking at the news or seeing what's going on in the world, you don't need to go that far back to find all of these things in your own ancestral constellation as well. And then the thing is, because, the fact that we do not own or honor our ancestors does not mean that these ancestors are necessarily happy in the other world or that the issues they carried will go away. They stay in the ancestral field. So the only way of them working with that and making things lighter and less burdened in your own family and in your own psyche is to make that commitment to ancestral healing work, ongoing ancestral healing work, along with that shadow work we're just talking about. And there is a lot of shadow work in ancestral healing work.
Yes, it's been very fascinating because going back through that ancestral line and seeing the atrocities which were committed by members of the family, but also being oppressed, so we go back to that kind of colonization kind of concept. But we've all been part of it. It's part of our tapestry.
Yes. And also we have been on both sides. That's what I always find. If I either look at previous lifetimes, that I believe I've had, or if I look at the ancestral field, ultimately these two lines of work, they behave the same way, these two fields. And then you sort of realize sometimes I have been the oppressor and sometimes I have been the victim and sometimes I've been a woman and sometimes I've been a man. And sometimes I've been in Northern Europe where I am today and sometimes I've been born in a very different part of the world. So also in doing that work, I find that a lot of the divisions we impose, like male, female, white, black, child, adult, oppressor, victim, these things start dissolving if we go far enough back and we go within ourselves and we work with all of that, because then all of this whole constellation of possibilities is right there again, and we realize that we have lived all of these things, and knowing that also makes it easier not to judge people too severely. If you can own within yourself, this is within me, this is in my ancestral field, it really changes the way you judge other people, if that makes sense.
Yes, because also judgment, when we judge other people, that's simply coming from our own lack of perspective of the totality of self.
Yeah, it often does. Yeah.
And so these aspects, and I think this is one of the things which is most fascinating, is that when we do the shadow work and we do engage on that level of going right back through the family line, et cetera, and not just bloodlines, but also the spiritual lines as well.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And we're able to see that totality, that we are these multi-complex beings with so much potential.
Yeah, exactly. And also that we are so much more, as you say, I think it's an important point. We're so much more than our biological family. Some people really get on with the biological family, other people struggle with the biological family. But in a very real way, we're also in spiritual lineages, the people, or maybe the people who are our teachers, or the people who are key figures in our life, or the people we admire. We're actually in so many circles, we're in so many constellations, and that the things we're not going to find necessarily in our family of birth, we can find them elsewhere, and it has as much of a place and a validity in that inner landscape. It's equally valid.
Yes, because I just know in my own story, even the family that I've been born into, I don't feel part of, but yet I can see the weave and the thread going back, and how it still affects me because I've been born into that family.
Yeah. But that's the other thing as well, that in our culture today, we think we can walk away from our ancestors. And sometimes when I've talked to people about, ancestors in general, people say, they're long dead, why should I care? Or another thing I get when I say, well, really, we need to bring back a form of honoring of ancestors. It was in earlier times, it was the pivot. It was the axis on which the universe turned, because it was believed that there wouldn't be blessings and good things in this world if we did not honor the ancestors and what they had given us. So we're kind of breaking a cycle of reciprocity. And so then when I say that, people will then always say, oh, I had some right old awful ancestors. I met some of them before they died. I want nothing to do with them. And then you have to take that whole discussion and say that, well, if you're open to the idea that they may continue to evolve on the other side of the veil, just as they were trying to do, only in as far as they were able, in this world, maybe if you connect with them now, you're still going to sort of, they're not going to be exactly who they were. And then there's also the fact that all of us have a kind of totality of soul. We have a higher self outside space and time that is much larger than ourselves here, in this world. And we can also choose, if we do not feel safe connecting to the person, we can certainly connect to that. You can call it a higher self, a sacred self. People use different words. But when you connect on the level of soul to the divinity and the totality of that other person, then there can always be an encounter.
Yes, a deep shift. And what's interesting is that bringing that shadow work into our day-to-day life and seeing how we are interacting with each other, and each person has something to reflect back to us. It's exactly the same on the ancestral line, because if there was an auntie or an uncle or somebody that we didn't like, then obviously we are carrying some of that energy that still needs to be healed.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly it. So where we hold uncomfortable feelings, or where something really triggers us or makes life difficult, the gift is that it tells us where there is work to be done. And then, of course, if we want to get away from the discomfort, then you may want to run from it and slam the door on it. But that's really a train missed or an opportunity missed, because it's in these kinds of, where things get uncomfortable, that's where the opportunity is to really go in and learn something or do something. And I've had that in my own family. I had one uncle who died 2 years ago. And the whole family always said, oh, he's such a loner, he's antisocial. And a lot of was projected onto him just because he didn't want to be with other people the whole time. And then after he died, I had some dialogues with him. And I realized that actually there is an awful lot of that uncle that still lives in me. And probably in the family. But, if you look at all the different personalities, I'm the one who's most able to understand where this man was coming from. And I really had to say that to him after death. go in and say, actually, I want you to know, I know you felt misunderstood, but just through the circumstances of my own life, I do understand, or I think I do understand, like why you made certain choices and felt a certain way. And then the moment that you sort of, say that in a ceremony, or, you light a candle and you talk to the ancestors, have an ancestor gallery. From the moment I do that, you really feel something settling into place. There's a kind of peace that comes from that.
Yes, and also because, learning and working with the ancestors, but also doing the shadow work in the day-to-day life, but understanding, especially going through the ancestral line, understanding why those decisions were made and why that trauma happened and what caused that person to behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
To expand our level of consciousness, but also our compassionate self.
Yes, and also just to say, it's not that our compassionate self doesn't have boundaries. And, even when we step away from judgment, we still operate discernment. I'm not advocating that absolutely anything is fine. I operate boundaries. There are things I will not get involved in. So, so I think it's very important to say that it's not like a kind of like woo where anything goes. I'm not, not promoting that. But it's still where you get to a place, where you say kind of on the level of soul, I know where this person came from. On the level of soul, I understand what's going on here. I may not want it in my own private home the whole time, or I may not want to expose my children to it. That's a different matter. There's where I draw a boundary. But for me, the task is always to understand and say, but this is still a human being, and we don't really know the traumas that have shaped a human being. So, we need to sort of bear that in mind as well. And just sort of say, what has shaped this human being? How has this human being arrived in a place where they're behaving like this? Or, and just rather than just saying, oh, they're awful people, but actually investing the time and energy to make that journey.
Yes, very fascinating. And so, when we engage as inner work as a form of activism, and we really start to expand our awareness, and we start to engage with our own inner process on a much more wider level, how can that really help us then instigate that massive shift that we need on a global scale? So, for example, climate change. Okay, so I'm just going back to Extinction Rebellion. How can that really help us to redefine the relationship that we have with Mother Earth?
Well, I think it's a really, really huge job, both in the external world, as it's proving to be, but also in the internal world. Because the moment we really, really look at that, even in the real world, in the external world, it's like we have to look at all of our choices. What do I own? What do I eat? How do I transport myself around the world? And how do I, provide all of these things for my children as well? And it's actually pretty hard to lead a really, like a life with a very small carbon footprint that's very ecologically sound. So whenever I do that work, I realize just how many shortfalls I have, and I am working on it. But there are so many areas where actually I feel I'm not doing too well. And my children will say, "Mom, you could do better." I think, yeah, you're right. As a family, we need to do better. This is true. So that is the whole sort of external side of it. And also that it is in so many little things, even the consumerist thing. We buy things we don't really need. We buy clothing we may only wear twice. Or we give things to a charity shop thinking it's going to a good place. In the US you say thrift shop. But I was reading recently, like 40% of what is in charity or thrift shop actually goes to the dump because they cannot sell it. So even sort of sending things to charity is not an ultimate solution for anything. So, there are so many, it's like a full-time job almost if you want to do it properly. And that's before we even start working on the internal level. But then also on the internal level, we feel, that we have polluted waters in our ocean, and think of all that plastic that the whales are choking on. Water is also like our own emotions. Where do I still hold toxic emotions? Like where in my inner landscape, are life forms choking on, plastic or pollution or, things I still hold on to that serve no more. So along with developing a smaller carbon footprint and like owning less things and decluttering and all of that, Marie Kondo, I also like inside myself need to do the work of unraveling all of this. Why do I still hold on to this like memory? Or I still have a pocket of pain there. Does it still serve a purpose? Do I still have something to learn? Or is it maybe time that I ask for the blessing of forgetfulness now and that I release it for once and for all? So the work to be done on the inside is as daunting and enormous as the work to be done on the outside, but they must go hand in hand.
Yes. And I think this is a very important point, because when we talk about the emotions, so for example, there's a lot of dense energy in regards to anger and rage, and we see this continuously being acted out in the external, in our relationships, and then obviously in the political realm and religion, etc., etc. But then when we look at the anger on the inside, if we are working with that anger and we are reacting to it unconsciously, then that's even a part of the pollution. It's part of that toxic pollution that we're experiencing.
Pollution, but also being human beings are often not aware of what they are reacting to. Human beings get triggered. I mean, I do it myself all the time. I do not float above any of this. I'm deep in it, But, I observe that for people who are like not walking a committed spiritual path and engaging in very deep self-reflection, people often think when they get triggered, meaning when something really blows up for them, that they think, now I am right and I've hit a point of truth because I feel it so strongly, which is actually not right. Because when you get triggered, what it really means is all stuff that's coming up. Someone may have said something relatively mild, like an outside observer might think, that wasn't so bad. But because maybe my father said that to me like for 20 years when I still lived at home, I have an enormous reaction to it. But like the reaction I'm having is not actually in proportion to what is going on here in the moment with a colleague who just makes, a comment that's not intended maliciously. So it's also like, doing that work of really like, mapping what our reaction patterns are, and especially mapping, where do things get intense for me? Like, where do I get angry? Or, who or what really annoys me to do? What are the things I just cannot stand? I can barely bear to be in the room with it. All of these things are not things to avoid necessarily uncomfortably. No, they're all things like they tell us. They're like road signs telling us where we have more inner work to do. And then sometimes we need to do the uncomfortable work of really sitting with it. And, I do that, try to do that quite a lot when I most have the tendency to run off and I want to not be near something or in a situation. I force myself, get out the notepad, I sit still, and I say to myself, I'm going to make the commitment to stay with this. I'm going to make the commitment to be uncomfortable, but I shall sit with this until it dawns on me what's really going on here. And then you find it unfolds like a journey because you can move through it. And then once you get to the other end of that, it's like wow, there is mega inside.
Yes. And I think that's also when we reach that wow moment, when we've gone through something so deep and which can seem very dark and ominous, but we've come out the other side. That's really when we feel the potential of our own magic and our own power, that we've actually engaged with that.
Yeah, exactly. And power, personal power. Every time we do it, I believe we step a bit deeper into our power. It's become a catchphrase. People say, well, you need to be in your power. Oh, he's not really in his power. And I'm sure a lot of people think, well, I sort of see what you mean, but like how we should change it. I think a lot of people do not realize, like how that might be done. But this is exactly an example of that, where every time we do this work and we unravel something really major and we give it a place and we kind of make our peace with it, from that moment onward, that situation has no more power over us, meaning we are more in our power, and there is more of us available to bring to the table in the real world, outside world.
Yes, and I think also this is where radical responsibility comes in.
Oh yes,
taking responsibility for our stuff.
You may not feel like healing it, but look around your family. Who else is going to do it? So I'm very much a subscriber to the 100% responsibility thing. So even if something happens that in a way I've not externally created, at the end of the day, if it's in my line of vision, it's affecting me, it's affecting my family life, there's only one thing for it. That is that I take responsibility for it and that I, find a way of dealing with it. And that is another thing we don't really learn. And, like as children, it's like, oh, that's not fair. It's like life is not fair. But life can be very rich and abundant and magical when we get beyond the notion that everything is going to be fair, which is not going to be. But I find that's what this whole thing about it's not fair. I had major issues with that, my younger self. And I'd constantly think, but that's not fair. I thought, well, I'm sort of reasoning like a child here. And at some point, just for this whole thing about things being fair or not fair, yes, as a parent, you try to do it with your children, you try to make things fair, and then you realize it becomes so kind of like artificial, and they don't encounter it in the world outside. As a mother, you ask yourself, is it even fair to always be fair with my children? You can go on a sort of kind of trip with that. But then when I thought, well, okay, if I make my peace with the fact that for all sorts of very complex, karmic, ancestral, whatever reasons, things are not always going to be fair, and I release the idea that I want them to be that, then I can be more present to what really is. Now, what really is, now this is the modeling clay that I'm going to be working with and that I'm going to use to create my reality.
Yeah. And so I'm just curious, and please feel free if you don't want to answer this, but obviously you have 3 beautiful boys. So I'm curious how you work with them with shadow work. Are they present and understanding of shadow work in their own lives?
Oh, they are, actually, surprisingly so. Like, there's other things they do less well, like taking out the dishwasher or tidying the rooms without being asked. And one is at uni now. He doesn't live with us full time anymore. But I remember with my eldest son, at some point when he was in 6th from college, like 18-year-olds before you go to uni, I was talking to him, like he had some issues in his friendship group, and I could sort of hear there was a lot of shadow doing the rounds. And he was like really stuck on it. And he said, Mom, I know you do these things with students sometimes, and I'm not in the class, but I think you probably have something to say about this. I said, Quinn, let me explain the concept of shadow work to you. Are you willing to listen for a moment? Now, Quinn, at that point, 17 or 18, folded his arms and he said, yeah, okay. I mean, something needs to be done here. I'll listen. So I explained the whole thing to him. And he's like, well, that kind of makes sense. We said, how would I apply that then? I said, well, so we used the whole scenario. And I said, well, rather than doing this, you could look at it that way and look at inside yourself and then meet the person from a different place. And he actually went and he took that back to his friendship groups. And I do quite a lot of it with my youngest son as well. Like my youngest son, Brendan, he really, really knows what shadow work is. So some sort of thing will come up and he'll be in a bad mood. And I'll sort of say, and have you done your shadow work on this? He says, I'm trying to do, but I need to spend more time on it. So in our family life, it's kind of woven in. And even my husband will sometimes say, well, X, Y, Z at work. I say, well, okay, that is the external surface layer. And now the shadow reflection, please. And he'll say, yeah, okay, you're right. And, so I think we're all a work in progress, but I think that is the thing we try to do in this family. Like with other things, we don't do very well, but, like we don't cook very well, but I think we do our shadow work.
Yes, and I think it is just about, even in our relationships, I know with Michele, it doesn't get triggered very often, but when he does get triggered, and I'm the first one, okay, let's have a look at the shadow. Let's go in and let's have a nosy, see what's there. But yes, bringing that into our relationships as well to make other people aware of what's going on and how it's working and how we are interrelating with each other.
Yeah, and sometimes, also depending who the people are and what the circumstances are, you can say that. I found myself recently, only with people I know very well, but a few, I got triggered as usual. And a few times I had to go back to people and I say, that conversation we had, that really brought something up for me. And I actually, had to struggle. I said, I've worked on it now. And, I'd like to tell you what the insight was. And like with the right people that you feel safe with or are willing to hear, it can be really amazing. Because in the moment you do that, they will also say, yeah, well, I noticed you got triggered. And that made me think what is going on here. And then sometimes they can tell you the matching story. And then you can sort of see, well, like my husband and I will do this, where you say, well, whatever your childhood, my childhood, your profession, my profession, whatever. And then you sort of see, you see the interlocking of these wheels. And you see, there is like a pattern here. And I'll often say to my husband, okay, now we can acknowledge that we're acting out a pattern. Have you seen this pattern before in your family? And he will say, well, actually, I've never thought of this, but now you say this, I have this great aunt would have conversations with my mother and get stuck just the way that we got stuck. And then you realize it's beyond the personal. You're dealing with something it was going on before you were even born. Yeah. But still, because you're on earth at this moment, you're the person who has the privilege and the possibility, the opportunity to actually shift it.
And I think this is the magic also in it when we do work with it in relationship, is that obviously we have manifested that moment and also that person to actually reflect back in that moment something which is deeper, which does need our attention and our healing and our integration.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is also where conscious communication comes in, being able to have those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, and also when we do it in shamanic groups, when we teach, we don't do it a lot, in the outside world, but, where you allow a person to tell their whole story from A to Z without interrupting. And this is a thing that my husband and I mean, not for normal conversation, how was your day, but more when we're working on something, whatever, in our marriage, or something to do with the, like mother-in-law, whatever it is, or something difficult that's come up with the children, whatever. And then sometimes we will do it like in a shamanic course where we will agree that first you get to tell the whole story as you perceive it. And I will not come in and say, no, but, and I want to add. And, I will be completely quiet and I will be completely present to what it is that you want to tell me. And then we'll say, are you done now? And, so say my husband has just spoken and say, is this? And he said, yes, I really told you, this is how I see it and I have nothing to add. I say, okay, so is it okay now for me to tell you how I perceive this same thing? And will you please not interrupt me? And then I have my go. And then, it's just so helpful because it weeds out that whole, you just realize how much of everyday conversation is actually interruption rather than real meaningful soul connection. And, so that's the thing I would also recommend as a technique sometimes, less interruption, more deep listening.
And I think also, in like shamanic work, this is where we have the talking stick.
Yeah. Or the clock, people hate it when I have the clock. The smaller groups, like talking sticks more for a larger group, but in the smaller groups. And, it's like with the children, when my children were really young, if I said to them at 7 o'clock, I want you to go to bed, it became a personal issue. I was like the evil mother who wanted them, and I did want them tucked up and get to my evening, it was even true. And then I sort of discovered that actually I need to neutralize this. I'd say to them, look at the clock, the clock is telling us it's bedtime. And they wouldn't like it, but they'd go upstairs and go to bed. And there's something similar there with adults. It's better, to have a clock in the room and sort of say, it's nothing personal at all, but when the hands of the clock reach this amount of time, I'm going to ring a little bell.
Yes. And yes, boundaries. That's where boundaries come in.
But also these boundaries are in service, and we're back to things being fair. But if you teach a large group of people, as I do sometimes, and you can have some talkative people and very, very quiet types and everything in between. Now, if I do not chop up the time and tell people what their budget is, some people will start telling their life story and they'll still be going 3 hours later. Well, there will not be a workshop if you do that. Well, some of the students get triggered and then they say, oh, Imelda, you cut me off. You're such a harsh teacher. And I sort of say, do me a favor. I said we had half an hour for sharing. Yeah. Okay, well, you just kindly count for me. How many people are there in the room? 15. I said, well, okay, I'm sure you can do basic maths. If this is going to be fair, how much time do people get? 2 minutes. I said, yes. So at 2 minutes, I showed you the clock and I rang my little bell.
Yes. Yes, I think especially in shamanic work, this is so important, the clock. I just something that just came into mind when I was doing my training, and he made it very, very clear we had 20 minutes each and we had to narrate it in a kind of old, kind of poetic way.
Yes.
And I'd managed to refine mine to 20 minutes. And then there was another one that was just telling the whole story from beginning to end, which was an hour and a half. And so just relating back to that made me really appreciate having that time limit, and it is about boundaries and giving each other space to be able to express what they need to express in that time.
Yeah, exactly. And to make it fair, because, in any group, say some people will happily talk, but there will also be people who find it hard to talk. But then sometimes you have people like they don't even use the full amount of time, but what they say hits you so hard. It really comes from a very deep place. It's like, wow, this surely is a privilege to be in a room where someone feels that they can say this. And, if I just let the talkers talk the whole time, I'd never get to hear from the quiet people. So it's really important to have that boundary. Yeah.
Yes. And also, I think, in that group setting, this can also be a really potent place, a potent cauldron for the shadow work to really come in. Because I know it's something that you've talked about, the group shadow.
Oh,
And, we have to be very aware of this when we are engaging in that kind of work, because it always does come up.
it does come up, but this is the thing, groups need to do shadow work. Well, the individuals in that group, but also with other groups. Like I've talked about ancestral healing work, but there's also ancestral healing work to be done on how one tribe or one race or one group, one community, like any kind of collective, treats other collectives. And then you get the whole thing about, us and them, and, I belong and you don't, or you belong and I'm the outsider. And all of these dynamics play out. So, and this is where, I want to go with, I do a lot of like personal ancestral healing work, and as you know, I teach it as well. But at the moment, in that work, I'm beginning to see if we need to move into a place where we get groups together that commit to doing shadow work with other groups. And also, I think even just like cleaning up certain political situations. Like we never do the ancestral healing work on political situations. We just stand into a situation that's really entangled and difficult, and things have been set in motion. Then we just do an election, and another person comes in. We never do the cleaning up work. And we never look even like politics has an ancestral dimension. There were the ancestral politicians who are still in that field. So I think, ancestral healing work has so many applications, and we're only just beginning to scratch them. Yet I believe that work desperately needs to be done.
Yes, I think that is an aspect that I'd never kind of seen before, is that collective, working within the tribes and the groups on the collective. Mm-hmm. Because it has got so much potential to bring to light some things which we've probably never even seen.
No, exactly. And the thing is also, a key thing in shamanic work is you don't need to have the original people present, So, and I think that's one of the teachings of family constellations work. But it's not like you say, oh, well, sadly the person is now dead, there is nothing we can do. Well, that's not actually the case. A person who is alive today can, if they're willing to do it, go and take the place of that person. You can create or say there's someone who's always left out in a family. You can ask a person to sit in a special chair and say, and they're representing, all of these people. And it's the same with, say, groups of people. Or if you want to really understand what the underlying dynamics are in a situation, if say you wanted to look at a conflict between, Israel and Palestine, or think of the U.S. border, or think of any situation in the world. The thing that interests me more and more now is say, call together a group of people who have some shamanic skills and who have a high level of shadow awareness, and then really start working on that. Create two groups. Have these groups communicate with each other. Have them find words for what it is that comes up. And then when they're really, really deep in the work, then ask them what needs to be done here, like to heal this or to unravel this. And there, I think there is so much work to be done there. I sometimes wish I had 40 lives. I'm not going to have time to do it all. So I must train people up and, get other people doing it,
And I think this is really interesting because last year I spent some time in Northern Ireland, and it was the first time in Northern Ireland. So, I'm a northern girl. I come from the northwest of England. But it was really fascinating going into Northern Ireland for the first time, because I went in there. I arrived in the country very late at night with all of my conditioning, of the IRA and the troubles and everything else. And it was a really, as a shamanic practitioner, it was a fascinating experience because I was carrying all this baggage. But then actually when I got there, and my taxi driver at 2:00 in the morning was the most wonderful man. And we were talking about the troubles, and it was interesting, having that dialogue without that conditioning.
Yeah.
And so I can see how this work is really needed to be able to go in and have those conscious conversations to bring more attention and awareness to what's beneath the surface.
Yeah, that too. And also to have conversations in the sense of just aware also of how many people die in our world, have died in our world, have died under unfair circumstances in our world. But that whole thing of this work can be used to give a voice to the dispossessed. Like say, going back to the Holocaust remembrance, and I have to do it very often in healing work. It's like many people, everyone has like wars and genocide. And, if you go far enough back in an ancestral field, you kind of find it. And that's also why we cannot say it affected them and it didn't affect us. It is in our ancestral field, it affects all of us. But then also what you can do is you can then give a voice to the people who didn't have a voice, to the people who weren't allowed to speak. And sometimes just for doing that and having a group witnessing that and just sort of, have, whatever the situation is you're working with, but have the people who couldn't speak, weren't allowed to speak, were killed because they were saying things people didn't want to hear. You give them a voice and you allow that to be spoken in the room. And then you have a group of people really listening to that and say, I hear you and I'm fully present to you. And now I have heard this, I will always be aware of it and I carry this in my heart. And then you just feel the heat go out of the situation. You just feel that, a larger degree of peace starts to settle on the situation.
Yeah. And it comes to mind I can never say the word, the Apapono, which Jessica should know about this.
Yeah.
The Hawaiian prayer. It's a really beautiful way to honor and to sit with and to give gratitude and to also apologize at the same time.
Yeah, and that should be like shadow work. I try to use it as a mantra running under my breath. For even things, again, that aren't my personal fault in a direct way, but also to not have like a hierarchy of what requires an apology. Sometimes we think, there's so much going on in the world, I can only focus on the really bad stuff. And actually I find that to be fully present in my life, if I say I'm walking up the street and I see a parent being really harsh with a very young child, that's probably not the worst crime that's going on in London, UK right now. Nevertheless, I witnessed that. That made me connected to the situation. And it's not for me, I cannot apologize on behalf of the parent to the child, but I can still, as a witness to the situation, or apologize to the universe and ask that the apology goes where it is needed. The spirits will deliver it. I'm not in control of that. But I can still say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I love you. And thank you that I was given the opportunity to be in this situation and say that prayer.
Yes, and I think also that's really interesting because, when we do see the mother shouting at the child in the street and then using that apology kind of, I'm sorry, but then also seeing what our judgment of that situation was without knowing the backstory is kind of also apologizing for our reaction to it, which may have been unconscious.
Exactly. And I'm sticking with this like small example because you see that sometimes. It's so easy if you've had a good night's sleep and you've had breakfast and you have a home to go to judge a parent being harsh with a child in the street. But, on another level, I do the shadow work on that. I remember those days, our middle son for a year screamed all night, every night. And I had a hyperactive first son and I was pregnant with the third son. So there was not much sleep for that year. And I still remember walking around in this haze of exhaustion, and even the smallest tasks became really insurmountable, and I tried to keep 3 boys safe. Now later I think, my Lord, it's a miracle they're all still alive today. How did I do it? But the thing is, if I can just go to that memory, if I see a parent being harsh with a child in the street, they may have had really bad news. They may not have slept properly for a week. They may be worrying how they're going to pay the gas bill, and it is January in the Northern Hemisphere. We do not have all the information in a situation. And going within ourselves and accessing that, it also, we kind of also apologize to the parent. We can do the oponopono and apologize to the parent. It's not just like for the child, but it's like that the child and the parent find themselves in such a difficult situation, where this occurs. But that's kind of like it's learning to say the prayer and to be witness to that, and also to be witness to the discomfort in that. And yet do it without being judgmental, but saying, as I happen to be standing here, I need to be the one who speaks the prayer.
Yes, and that goes back then to responsibility, taking responsibility.
Yes, the 100% responsibility. Yeah.
And and I also like these these little moments in life that we see on a day-to-day basis when we're out, because it always reminds me that nothing is ever as it seems.
No, that is true.
It's always surface level.
It's true, but also all these little things you see around you in some way, and I don't want to sound like an egomaniac or a narcissist, but in some way it is always us as well. I sometimes have days where I walk around and I think, I was the mother pushing that baby in the pram. I was that man kicking a tree. Like I was that person like walking on the bridge, thinking really nasty thoughts about someone else. Like I have been all of these people and more. They all on some level live in me. And by appearing around me, they give me that opportunity to yet again try to become more conscious. I'm more conscious in that how every scenario we see in the street or wherever, how every person we meet always in some way reflects back that little part of us. So in a way, you could almost say that just walking around London is a form of soul retrieval, so to speak. I'm speaking in a slightly silly way here, but I mean what I say in the sense of that, even every stranger you see on the railway platform reflects something back at me, and I can either receive that or I can not be open to that and walk away from that. Even that thing where you get on a train and everyone is on their phone and no one looks at each other. It's kind of, when have I made myself completely unresponsive when a person really wanted to talk to me? And I know I do that all the time. I run for cover. I want my space. So it's kind of like in all of these things, there is that lesson to take away. And there is that opportunity to do healing work, to say a prayer where you ask for forgiveness.
And it does actually become a form of curiosity. What I found over the years with shadow work is that, okay, it's not all love and laughter when we're in it.
No.
But it's also, curiosity. So when I do get triggered, it's kind of like, oh, what's that triggered in me? Let's go in and have a look. Let's go and find out. Let's sit with it for a moment. And so it doesn't become fun, but it becomes such a natural way of engaging our imagination and our curiosity to find out what's beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And then also there's the thing, like every time you get triggered, there is also a gift. I sometimes find I get triggered because my involvement with something or my expectation is still too high. And then I get triggered again, and I'm getting quite tired of being triggered by this. And then I think, what is it I need to change here? And sometimes I seem to have this crazy high expectation of a person or of a group. And it's kind of like, this is just like, this is making my life difficult. And sometimes I make agreements with myself. I sometimes write contracts with myself. And I write it down on a piece of paper and I sign it. I now agree with myself that I will no longer expect this of myself. I now agree with myself. I'm going to try much harder to respond like that the next time this happens. And then, of course, I go and half of it goes wrong. But I also think that suddenly go right. And I think, now I've taken a step forward, And the rest will continue working with it. You will undoubtedly get triggered in the same way again, The universe is so kind. It gives us all of these repeat tests.
Yes, over and over again. And we'll keep having the test until we passed it.
Yes, exactly. And then when you pass it, you get the next test.
Yes, the next test. And there will always be a test.
There will always be a test.
Always guaranteed.
For life and beyond, yes.
So I'd just like to ask you, you've got your new book coming out during this year, I believe, Imagination. What was it called? Medicine of the Imagination. Please, would you just share with us a little bit about that?
Well, this was the book that I had not planned to write. I started writing it on the day that I'd sent all the edits for book number 2, that's the Sacred Art book, off to the publisher. And I'd really looked forward to it. I thought, I'm going to have painting time. I'm going to meet friends for tea. I thought it'd be so nice not to be writing a book. So I went to bed. It was even the night before. So it came in the morning. And literally, as I sent the one set of, you have to like sign off on the edits for a book and then the publisher takes over. And I really thought, I'm going to go to my studio and paint. And the spirits came and said very loudly, like, no. Now there is this book you need to write. And it's called, Medicine of the Imagination, Dwelling in Possibility. And I really thought, what on earth do they mean by that? And then there was this whole thing that you can't really use the word medicine. At least I've trained in the US. I was always told medicine is only for medical doctors. But then I thought, now here in the UK, people will speak of story medicine and, things like that. And then I just said to the spirit, well, I have no idea what this book is supposed to be about. And then they started telling me, and they said, we'll give you more information as you start writing it. But this book needs to be written like now. Now is the time. So I went back to my computer and I started writing another book. But really what it is, it's about the right use of the human imagination. Because we are all given the gift of imagination, but we receive very little lessons, if any, in like how to really focus our imagination and how to harness it. And the thing is that our imagination can also get quite active independent of us. It can keep all programming going. Or if we do not sort of monitor how many kind of like sort of, unkind or dirty thoughts we have, it can start creating quite a lot of, toxic, polluted outcomes. And I sort of find, especially in the world out there, even just walk around the streets and you hear the way people talk, you think, you just see it being set up and people are not using their imagination correctly. It's like this incredibly powerful muscle we are flexing. And actually, while writing that book, I learned that just as we speak of like, being fit, like going to a fitness club or going running and being physically fit, and we talk about being emotionally fit or being fit to be a parent or whatever, there's also such a thing as, the right use of the human imagination. So that's what the book became. It's a passionate plea for a right use of the human imagination and actually really consciously using that incredibly, it's one of the most powerful tools we have in creating and co-creating the world and our relationship within that world.
Yes, it sounds fascinating. And like you said, timely.
Yeah, I sort of now understand even better now because I started writing this 2 years ago because it takes a year for a book to go from being submitted to becoming a book in the shops. And now, even more so than 2 years ago, I really understand like what I wrote, what the spirits asked me to write, makes more sense to me now than it did 2 years ago. But I now realize it had to be written for this year. But of course, the publishing being what it is, you write it 2 years earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's actually quite interesting because I've noticed the same in my own process is that, it was never meant to be then.
No.
It was meant to be now, so you kind of put things off and you think, okay, it's me because I've not got discipline or I'm not doing my work or whatever it is. But actually there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah, there really is a divine timing to that. I mean, you work in a spirit-led way, as I know you do. It's another of these things we have to release, yes, we got to commit to it and do the work. But like we are not completely in charge of the timing or the spirits will come with ideas we hadn't even considered. So I also find that it's very much it has to be done in that kind of partnership. And like one of the things that I have had to learn is to do all these things that the spirits ask, not really knowing how it's going to end or even if it will end well, and yet not being in control of the outcome. And like I'm a control freak, I like things tidy, I like to know what my end destination is going to be. So this is challenging for me, but also like as I'm learning to do it, I also realize I get less uptight about things that go so-called like wrong, but often like what looks wrong to us, in our everyday eyes. Much later, you sort of see there was still like a purpose or a trajectory to that. And now when things go wrong or I get interrupted or a disruption occurs or a change of plans, I think, oh, interesting. Like, I wonder what the spirits are trying to orchestrate. Or I wonder what's going on here. And rather than sort of going and imposing my will on it, I'm going to make this happen no matter what. It's more like, okay, take a step back. Maybe now is not the time. And life becomes more playful and more, dynamic.
Yes. And also that opening of trust. You know, there is something bigger than us working its way through, and it's not all down to us. You know, everything has its time and its place.
Yes, and also there's not just me in the world. There's also like you and all other people, and you know, there's also that whole sort of ego thing to say like ultimately I'm a very small cog, but I do have my place in the sort of larger watch that is the world, and I have to keep my wheel turning. But also to say sometimes there will be things that I do not understand that are going to like block my path for a while, and then it is trust. Like I don't need to understand what that cosmic wheel is. You know, all I just need to learn is to be flexible and say, okay, if this is not a year, maybe next year. If now is not the time, then I'll go and do something else today. Rather than working myself up and forcing outcomes. Because then I, as a very tiny human being, am trying to force my will on the world, but I'm not acting in true partnership with everything else that is in the world.
Yes, and having that flexibility to kind of flow with it wherever it needs to flow to in that given moment.
Yes.
And I always remember, you know, one of the most useful pieces of advice I received was sometimes you only have trust and the present moment.
Yeah.
And you just got to go with it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this also helps us to get out of the head and out of that one who wants to control and to be more fluid.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's an ongoing thing. You don't learn it in one moment, do you? This is like a lifelong commitment to, you know, remind yourself of that. And, oh, here we have arrived at that point again.
Yeah.
Here, but I just trust that this serves a purpose, even though I cannot see how, you know?
Yes, we don't know how, but we will trust anyway.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to open the floor and let's hand over to question time.
Oh, I had a question going back to the ancestral healing.
Yeah.
You mentioned you made one statement. You said perhaps you're still holding energy that needs to be healed. Okay. Now, does that mean energy where, like, I as that being was wounded in some way, or is it the energy of the other person that I'm holding?
It could be either thing, but if we're talking about ancestral healing, it could be, for instance, if say you had an ancestor a number of generations ago, you never met him, and say that this person had really wanted to be a doctor or an artist, but say World War War came and they had to enlist and they died young. So this unlived dream of being an artist or a doctor like lives on. And then sort of say, you don't really sort of know this, but on another level, you're the one now carrying this. And then it may be that you live with this sense that, like, you know, maybe you became a medical doctor and actually, you know, you knew it wasn't really your thing. And you ask yourself, why did I do this? Or maybe you have the vague feeling that you should be a healer and you are not, and you go on healing courses. Or maybe you really had wanted to be an artist, but you carry that sense of unfulfillment. So though you always tell yourself, I'm going to do a course in art, I'm going to learn how to paint, you never get to the course. So there's always an interruption in your life and you don't get there. All of these things can be manifestations that are, it is absolutely you. This is something that is really real for you, but it is equally real in terms of your ancestral memory. So in that sense, like, you carry it and it belongs to you and only you can resolve it. But on another level, what you carry there, it was already in existence before you were born. You're also carrying the unresolved things of your ancestors.
I see. And the reason I asked that is I've been really coming into clarity with this like anger and rage energy that I've been feeling for a long time. And I always thought it was crone energy. And what I'm realizing, and I found out the other day just randomly that it's like the goddess Kali energy.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I've been carrying that forever and trying to understand why. And so I'm doing shadow work with Nicola, and we're unraveling a lot of wounds, which create natural anger and rage. But I'm still feeling, and then there's the Kali energy in and of itself, maybe in response to what's going on around me. Yeah. But I'm wondering, because, well, I'm wondering, I know the ancestors I've known in my life, like my father, everybody was angry in some way. Could
Yeah.
I be could I be carrying their anger too? And if that's the case, how do I discern that and maybe just kind of like get rid of that stuff? Like maybe an ancestral healing. I
Yes.
mean, yeah,
Well,
you know,
yeah. Yeah, well, I think what it sounds to like me, and I said I'm not a practitioner on the case, but I'm listening to you. And what it sounds to me like, if you're saying that so many people in my feeling carry real anger, and possibly it seems out of proportion to what's going on in their life at that time, then it seems to me that anger is an energy that's still left in your ancestral field. And if so many people feel it, maybe for not a very obvious reason, I would say it sounds like there is a lot of anger in your ancestral field that went unexpressed. People who were very angry and weren't heard. People who were very angry and they died without that being resolved. So
yes.
what I would then do is, well, then you can work on your own, or if it gets very overwhelming, it's better to work with a shamanic practitioner or someone like who understands ancestral healing work. But
Okay.
what I would then do is like really say, okay, anger is so present. I need to make anger an honored guest. So if this was going on in my life, I might even build a small altar and along with a candle, put things on it that for me represent anger. And I'd really say anger, rather than pushing you away and being annoyed that you're here, this is only like for this week, and then we close to work because I don't want to live like this forever. But like for a week, say, whatever is an acceptable amount of time for you, I say, I treat you like an honored guest in my house. I'm going to make time every day to really connect with you and to hear what it is you want to say. And then I would, go with that. And then maybe, also pay a lot of attention to my dreams. And maybe I'd find myself dreaming about scenarios that my ancestors faced. And, then I would speaking those words, prayers and words of apology. And I would make sort of, offerings. I'd, maybe even see if there was a positive resolution to it. That might be, say, by the end of the week when you've done lots and lots of work on this in lots of different ways. I would sort of say, okay, I've been carrying this anger in a kind of like dysfunctional manner, in the sense of I've not understood it and I've not used the energy of that constructively. But now I understand much better, what created this build-up of anger in my family. And I said, can I agree with all of you, those who are not here anymore, how I am to use this productively? And then the guidance may, for instance, come that you are to be a mouthpiece for those for whom it's not safe to express their anger, or that you make art in which anger is the center piece, and that you will have an exhibition of that work and really say this is all about anger. Or maybe that you have a group where you call other women together and you say, now we're going to do some work here where we really, all of us talk about anger, and anger isn't pushed away, but it's given space in the room. But there would be a million ways of working with that. But does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And the million ways too. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I do. Thank
Good.
you for that.
That's great. And good luck with that.
Thank you.
It's on work, yeah.
Yeah.
I really related to so much of what you shared. Let me see if I can get out of the light a little. And I mean, I'm kind of wondering if you could speak a little bit about the situation that I've just found myself in, that, many of us go through, of just really coming. I went and I got really deep into feeling a lot of my family patterns over the past the full moon, and really got to this place of just seeing how it peaked so strongly in me, feeling so much of the suffering that's gone on in my family, and I came to this very just feeling so much sadness in a moment on the full moon that had been building over a couple of weeks, because I was like really in the concentration of feeling it and how I've lived it out in my life and the family members around me. And literally I woke up the next morning with flu symptoms that lasted weeks, have now turned into a pneumonia. So I've been almost 3 weeks now in this very reflective place of, look what these vibrations have, how they've manifested so clearly in my physical, to be even, really kind of like took me down to do nothing else but reflect on the past weeks. So I've had quite a few conversations with Nicola, and she's really suggested a lot of things to move through this time. But I'm wondering what your perspective is around just transmuting this energy within, and because I can really still feel it in my lungs, and
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and I can feel it just hearing you talk. The thing that I do for myself is that I feel that a lot of things are very symbolic. So, for instance, I had a big chest infection over the Christmas period. And then for me, the question becomes that, why is it in my chest and not somewhere else? Like something seeks expression. So I was like, pay attention to like what it is. And for me, a chest infection, and I think pneumonia is a chest infection, it carries connotations of not being able to breathe, or maybe not being given enough space, or, like issues of support and oxygen. Like, am I inhaling? Am I bringing into myself what I need to provide the output I need to give? And then really, really sitting with that. For me, sometimes there have been lessons around, like, I need to slow down my schedule, or maybe there are some commitments I need to cancel, or maybe there are some people I need to talk to and sort of say, I actually need you to give me some more space. And what I find when I start working on that symbolic level, then often the physical symptoms start to shift as well. And you could also go deeper with that and say, if it's so closely connected to your family, that's almost like what Pauline was asking a moment ago, and say, because as you speak, I really hear like the weight of the suffering in your family. And then maybe I would ask on that level, like, are there people in my family alive today, or people who are no longer with us, who maybe felt they weren't given the space to breathe properly or to express who they really were in the world? And then I sort of, feel into that. And if I felt there is some charge there, then I would try to find ways of performing a ceremony and doing that, to say, well, it would depend on the kindness that came, but I would take that into a ceremonial space. I would also, I know you're in Hawaii, a beautiful location, spend time outside. And like, if I have a chest infection, I know I need to speak to the wind and to the element of air and sort of ask, why is it so difficult for me to breathe right now? So I would make a whole map of all these like possibilities and all the things it might be telling me. And then I would use shamanic means and ceremony to work on all of those angles at the same time. I don't know if that is helpful.
I think something is very much in my sphere of attention at the moment. So I'm approaching my 43rd birthday, and there's been a very significant pattern between me and my parents all of my adult life connected with money. And so really me taking too much money and being dependent financially during times when it's not appropriate for me to be financially dependent. And there are obviously to you, Imelda, there are other circumstances like being left as the sole carer to my children that mean I've needed more help than I would have done with a good solid partner.
Yeah.
But it has really been brought into the family sphere in quite a dramatic way because of not having a stable place to live. And I'm just thinking, like, I'm really, really aware that what it's representing for me is actually a chance to break this pattern, because I think it's especially me and my mother that we're actually both in it. So it's quite a codependent pattern where I don't quite push myself out enough and gather the money myself because I know that she'll help me. And it's getting to that point where she's saying, I've helped you enough. which is probably quite healthy. And I don't quite know where I'm going with this, but it just feels like this is in our ancestral field, and I know I'm being presented. It feels quite difficult. It feels a bit like, where are we going to live? How am I going to pay for the children to stay at school? And all these things that I've not been good at attending to. But it does feel like I'm being presented right now with this opportunity, and that it's a much older thing than probably even me and my mother.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, and I know you have trained in ancestral healing work. I also know when you have 4 children running around, it can be hard to really find the time to focus or anything for very long. I appreciate that as well. As you were talking, I'm like fully appreciating how challenging this is. I mean, this is very, very, as said, not knowing what your permanent home is going to be, and then the partner has left the picture, 4 children, your mother becoming older and having health problems. I mean, there's an awful lot going on in this situation, but I would sort of say that I'm also hearing, as it was with the other speakers, that I think something is being played out here that it goes back to before your birth and probably your mother's birth. And that is something worth looking at. So that's like a line of investigation. Another thing that I'm also very much hearing is that in its purest sense, money is a form of energy exchange. Now, I know it's used in all sorts of other ways in our society, but in its sort of purest form, money is meant to facilitate a neutral flow of energy. So hearing you speak, for me, the question also comes, like when your mother says, like, I've had enough in terms of giving you money, and I'm like hearing that on the everyday level. Mm-hmm. But I'm sort of wondering, is your mother maybe not even consciously communicating that there is another energetic exchange that is not in balance? And I appreciate that in the current circumstances, for you to just say, I give my mother a big pot of money is not a realistic solution. Yeah. But to sort of think, is there another way in which your mother is needful of energy? And I mean energy in a form that you are able to give, and that, does not take essential things away from the 4 children you're responsible for. Because I get the feeling that there is something larger being brought to attention here, and that there is a core issue, a core imprint or issue in your relationship. You might maybe all have them. It's not only you. We're now talking about your scenario. And that, it's very easy to go to the hopeless way where you think this is completely unsolvable. I'm going to get depressed. But the other way of saying it is to take a step back and say, my mother and I have reached this point now where she has indicated that a line is drawn. And this is very, very difficult. So she's also indicating that she's like open to change, and that something is like bothering her enough to draw this line. So something is coming to attention. So I think there needs to be both, like a healing, but there also needs to be an energetic renegotiation. And that is the question that if I were you, I would be asking myself where, and I forget about money for a moment. Probably not, money is not the area where you can fix this. But is there in some other way or form, where does there need to be an energetic renegotiation, or where needs energy in whatever form need to flow from me to my mother, so that my mother no longer feels that she's the piggy bank, as it were. She's indicating that something is out of balance. Now, how can you heal and address that?
Thank you so much. I can't really begin to say how much I needed to hear that said to me in that way tonight. Thank you so much, and I agree totally. But it's useful to have that idea of the renegotiation, and a rebalancing of it. Thank you so much, Imelda.
Yeah, and especially not to think of it as money. Like, put money back in its original form, energy exchange.
Yeah.
Well, Imelda, thank you so much. It really has been a beautiful experience. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your light, your darkness, and the totality of you. It's really been an honor to sit in circle again.
Yes, and I really loved getting your invitation, and I was definitely going to commit to doing it. So I'm like really happy to have been here with all of you tonight. And so, thank you for the invitation. Also, thank you for a night spent in this beautiful, be it virtual company, but nevertheless, it is a circle, as you say. So thank you all of you for being and bringing yourself.
Yes, it's been a pleasure, and thank you all, ladies, for joining us, because this is the whole point, is to bring conversation to other people, not just two-sided.
Thank you for tuning in to the Feminine Principle podcast. If you have enjoyed listening and received value from this episode, then please consider supporting the work to create a circle of reciprocal generosity. The link is below, with love and gratitude.